I'm Michael Cashman. I was born here in Warren in 1941 to Bill and Ella Cashman. Graduated from Warren High School in 1959 and attended the University of Michigan. Graduated in 63, went to the Warren School 64, 66. Got drafted and was inducted in Buffalo, New York into the Army. I think it was July 5th of 66. Went with two war nights on the bus, a bunch of us. One was Bob Duffy, the other one was Jackie Blair, the grandson of the founder of New Process, and Blair, later Blair. Inducted, we were bused to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where I did my basic training for 2 months in that summer. That was an experience. And then I was assigned to Fort McClellan, Alabama, in Anniston, Alabama, where it was sort of an on-the-job training and basically in the payroll function. And I was actually assigned to a group that was going to be deployed overseas, but I was assigned to the headquarter company, the sort of payroll group at Fort McClellan. And at one point, the gal a civilian who ran the payroll office said to me, I will have you transferred in here and you can get out of this group that's going overseas. And I declined. I was told that the group was going to be going probably to Germany, and I was excited about that. I'd been in Europe the summer before. And declining, so I stayed with the group that was going to be trained for overseas. And so the time came as the Department of the Army's wheels turned and the orders came down. I went to a meeting with the AG, and this guy said to me, it looks to me like you're not certainly going to Germany, but I think you're going to go to Korea, given the APO. And I said, okay, maybe that's better than going to Vietnam. And a week or two later, we were all called in because we were going to be shipped out. And first thing the guy said, by the way, Cashman, that APO is not Korea. You're going to go to Cu Chi, Vietnam. So that was sort of opened up my eyes a little bit, but there I was. In late February of '66 that I went to Oakland, California and did some processing. And after a day or two, we were bused to Travis Air Force Base. And we flew via Hawaii and Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines on Braniff Airlines, believe it or not. Actually, it was a very pleasant experience. I remember that we had great meals, and I remember they gave us socks, and it was the way to go to war. So we arrived at Benoit Air Force Base in Vietnam on March 1st. We flew over the international date line. I remember that the February 28th in a way never existed in my life because of crossing the international date line. And so we were in Vita, we arrived in the middle of the night, all of us anxious, never been in a war zone, didn't know what to expect. And I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to be doing. So we had an in-processing moment with the 90th replacement at Long Binh for a couple days. And I was assigned to the 199th Infantry Brigade at Long Binh. And so I went up there, and I think I had to get some travel pay, so I went around to the payroll office, and I talked to Major Hood, who ran the whole payroll function for the 199th Infantry Brigade. And he looked at my training, my background, and he said, I'm going to have you transferred in here and work for me. So I felt very good about that, because I just assumed not be out there in the race paddies and chasing the Viet Cong and Charlie. And so that's what I did for almost the 13 months that I was in Vietnam. As far as my memories early on, I lived in an 8-man tent, and the group had arrived in Vietnam. The 109th, at least my section I had arrived, was a support group, had arrived about 3 months before that, so I was sort of a newer, but initially we lived in 8-man tents, cots. And it was an adjustment sleeping in the tropics. And another thing that would happen is that there were howitzers that would periodically fire rounds out into the countryside. What were they called? They were basically aiming to discourage the Viet Cong from moving around in the dark. there's a name for it. Bob might know, remember the name for it. But anyway, that didn't make for particularly good sleeping. And after a couple of months of living like that, and we had actually a little village with streets with all these 8-man tents lined up and so forth. They began building a village at the base camp at Long Beach for the 199th Infantry Brigade. And we had barracks, 2-floor barracks. The buildings were essentially built for the tropics, so that they were framed, but the outsides were open to the air, so the buildings could breathe, and inside there were screens to keep the critters away. And we built a wonderful mess hall. By the way, the food, believe it or not, was very, very good. The people in Washington, they wanted to at least keep us happy as far as what we were consumed eating wise. I was probably in country about maybe 6 weeks, where Major Hood and Sergeant Duke, who was my superior, said, let's all go to Saigon, which was about 13 miles away. So we all loaded up with our gear and ammo and so forth and guns, and went into Saigon. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because Saigon at one point was called the Pearl of the Orient, and it was French colonial. It was a French Indochina. And going in there, the thing that struck me was all the war damage. But more than that, because the war had been going on for so long, a lot of the Vietnamese folks out in the rural areas had swarmed into Saigon. And so driving into Saigon, it was just swarming with people. And the thing about it was the French cars, the motorcycles, the motor scooters, these pedicabs, guys on bicycles, with little trailers for 2 or 3 people, just swarming, And the other thing that I remember, and it was just devastating to see how the impact of the war was such that families were essentially living under corrugated tin roofs on posts, mats, their cooking pot there, so forth, their children there, and so forth, and that's where their home was. And the other thing I remember was the open air markets with, again, the corrugated tin roofs and the posts, and they were selling all kinds of things that they were pretty exotic to me, and I remember the aroma was pretty strong and overwhelming. But we visited a number of places. We went by the American Embassy, and the famous 1973, that famous picture of them evacuating Saigon from the roof and so forth. But I remember it would look like a fortress to me, and there were all kinds of military police and so forth. And we went, by the Chamber of Deputies. We had lunch at the Continental Hotel, and it was an interesting, day. Later on, we decided, maybe another 3 or 4 weeks later, Major Hood invited me to go by chopper. We went in those ubiquitous Huey Iroquois to pay our troops in the forward areas. So we went to a place called Cadillac and Na Bay and Ben Chon. And these were in areas that were, heavily, a lot of heavy fighting going down there in the Mekong Delta. And I can remember, being, I think it was at Ben Chon, and it reminded me of a fort right out of the Old West, where it was, just sandbags and bunkers and so forth. There was a little heel pad in the middle of it. It was a very muddy thing. But they were constantly out on patrols and also getting mortared and rocketed and so forth. And then we went to Na Bay, I remember, and that was, again, another place where we had forward 199th Infantry Brigade chiefs. But that struck me as a pretty good place, because it was a former French rubber plantation, and it was like a nice French villa, and it had a pool, and it had tennis courts and so forth. July of 67, but at 3,000 feet flying over the Mekong Delta, what impressed me was looking down at the Saigon River and seeing all those freighters, coming into Saigon to provide provisions for the buildup of American troops. At that point, they were bringing in 100 pounds of provisions for every American troop in Vietnam, and this is 1967, 68. And I think at the max number of American troops in Vietnam was probably sometime in 68, when there were 550,000 American troops in Vietnam. So it was a pretty big logistics deal. Talking about provisions, I would go to the 2nd Field Forces PX often to get things, and it was just amazing how cheap it was. And the government obviously subsidized it, but you could buy a case of beer for $2.50. I didn't smoke cigarettes, but I smoked cigars. But I remember you could buy a carton of cigarettes probably for about the same amount of money. And occasionally I had to have get a bottle of scotch. A bottle of Chivas Regal was probably $3. So you can't do that today, can you? And so forth. So anyway, it required a lot of work, and every week and a half I got a half a day off. And I would, I can't remember, it must have been, I could catch a bus, but I went over to the Benoit Air Force Base and went to their swimming pool. And of course, Benoit was the busiest airport in the world, actually, with the war going on and so forth. And, not only commercial flights coming in and out, but you had all these C-130s, you had all these helicopters, and then we had all these F-104s, and they'd always go out in pairs. And we were only 5 miles off the runway at Benoit, busiest airport in the world, and there was a lot going on there. And I can remember it had a high diving board, and I enjoyed the swimming, but I stayed up the high diving board because I had heard that at the Tatsuno Air Force Base down in Saigon, that some guy went up on the high diving board, was about to dive, and a sniper picked him off. So I decided, maybe I'd stay a little closer to the ground. So, but that's how, that was sort of my vacation day. It was actually when you work so hard, you have a half a day off. It was like having a long weekend, it was sort of silly. The other eye-opener was with all these American troops around there, the good and the bad. And the bad was it created a lot of things that appealed to some GIs, and there were a lot of sleazy bars, and there were also a lot of brothels. I was able to go on 2 R&Rs because I had enough time in the country. Most people didn't get a chance to go but one. And sometime probably the fall of '67, I went to Penang, Malaysia, and in Georgetown, and I really enjoyed that. It was about 5 days and so forth. Did a lot of things. Spent some time at a wonderful European hotel over there on the Straits of Malacca, looking out the Indian Ocean. One of the things I remember was I was out there, by myself. I had a meal that was called tiffin, and basically it was 5 courses, and I had 3 or 4 native boys, I guess, dressed immaculately in white, waiting on me, and the price was $2.50 for that experience. But then my second R&R was, as I was getting closer to my stay in Vietnam, was to Singapore, and I enjoyed that experience too. Did I ever feel unsafe early on? Probably not. I mean, there were, I was aware that the enemy was out there. I used to go for runs to stay in shape, and and run. We were in the northern end of what we called 2nd Field Forces, about a 7 or 8 mile American base. It was basically where a lot of the war command centers was based. There were people up in the. We were in the 3rd Corps area. The fighting was very heavy in the Highlands. The fighting was very high up there, closer to the North Vietnam border in I Corps area. But there were things going on, and I was very aware that at night, especially, the Viet Cong were moving around the countryside, because I would see what we called spookies. Okay, I think they were they C-130s, but they had parachute flares. So they would be dropping the parachute flares on suspected movements of the Viet Cong in the countryside around us. And also, they were spotted out there, and they had what they called, they were old World War II aircraft. I forget what they were, but they were all, anyway. And they were called Puff the Magic Dragon, and they were an interesting a weapon, because they could fire within a matter of 15 seconds to 30 seconds, thousands of rounds. What I remember about it was, as we watched them firing into the countryside, every 8th bullet was a red tracer bullet, but it was just amazing firepower. And so there were times when I got pulled out to do some things like dig ditches, which basically I'll tell you in a few minutes about, which turned out to be a beneficial thing to me when we got attacked on the night of Tet Offensive. And I told you I was going to tell you I went out for runs along the perimeter, and an MP, was out there sort of by myself, and there was a village to the north that was called Honai Village, and we were only separated from them by some large barbed wire, but the military policeman said, I think you're taking your life in your hands out here running around by yourself, but I don't know, I didn't. For some reason, I knew it was a village where a lot it was a heavily Catholic village, and these people had moved in from, further up country where they were under a lot of pressure from the folks who were, fighting on the communist side. The thing that I remember is as we started to build our village, we built our barracks, we built a mess hall, we built we had a medical place where there were doctors, I even had dental work and so forth, and it was all laid out, very nice, so forth. We had latrines for cedar latrines, and it was always a great experience. At one time I was called upon to do duty to remove the waste from those latrines and burn them. And I remember that was an exciting day for me. Life seemed to move along pretty rapidly. While I was there, to sort of keep my sanity, I carried a pine cone in my pocket. And the pine cone came from my parents' place. They had a place up in the mountains on top of Fall Run Road. And it was an Austrian pine, and every once in a while I'd smell it, think of Warren County. Another thing that I remember was that we basically hired a number of young, maybe not so young, Viennese women to come in and do things like wash clothes, shine shoes, make beds, and so forth. And here was the interesting thing, was I think they were paid like $2.50 a day. And it was causing problems. The problem was it was causing tremendous inflation in Benoit province. Can you imagine that? You're being paid $2.50 a day and they were causing inflation problems and so forth. And some of the gals actually came from what we called the Widows' Village. And the Widows' Village was about a mile or two down the road, and a lot of the women in there were widows because their husbands were members of the Army of South Vietnam, had been killed, and so forth. But so when things started to ramp up, we also started building a lot of bunkers, okay? And we built the bunkers right outside of our barracks so that we were anticipating the day might come when we'd be rocket and mortared, and that day did come. And I also pulled guard duty prior to me sort of moving up the ranks and eventually becoming buck sergeant. But anyway, the bunkers were out on our perimeter, in the 199th Infantry section of the 2nd Field Forces. And I used to pull guard duty, and looking up the South Vietnamese countryside hour after hour was pretty boring, but I was expected to do that, and I did it. Eventually, when I got sort of promoted, I didn't have to do a lot of those things. So anyway, life went on, and the biggest in November or December, I made a decision that I was going to extend, and the reason I was going to extend was that if I came back after extending to San Francisco, I would be discharged. And the way it worked was if you had 90 days or less to do in your terms of service, they discharge you, which would mean if I got back to San Francisco with 90 days to go, I'd get out of the military early, and I'd be done, and I'd go on with the rest of my life. So basically, I did that. Fortunately, when I got back to San Francisco, I only ended up spending 21 months of active duty. But so I did that, and signed it probably November, did the paperwork. So now it is in January or so forth, and and by this I've been promoted, and now I'm and a lot of the old guard that came through must be formatted out. We're rolling back to the States, so I got more and more responsibilities. So initially, I was put in charge of about 8 or 9 guys in our office. And I was the point man as far as when new recruits would come in and so forth. I was the guy that would give the speech about what you need to do, blah, 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 blah. And eventually, I was a non-commissioned officer the whole. I basically, at the end, the last couple of months, 2 or 3 months, I was basically the non-commissioned officer in charge of all payroll, all travel kinds of things for the entire 199th Infantry Brigade and so forth. But anyway, so it got to be in January of '68, and we were approaching what they call the Vietnamese New Year's, which is called Tet. And the expectation was that things would sort of go into a lull, and the Vietnamese would be celebrating and so forth. And in fact, things seemed to be quieting down and so forth. In fact, the commanding general of 199th thought this is a good time for me to go back to the States. This guy's name was Forbes. I have to tell you the story about Forbes. But anyway, so he basically went back to the States. So anyway, so it's the night of January 30th, and Mike Cashman has been delegated to be, actually I was the assistant sergeant of the guard. And that meant that basically I was in the middle of the complex in a big bunker, tackle operations bunker, and my job was to every 2 hours, and we had bunks and so forth for troops, that for every 2 hours, I would go out to a truck park, big Klieg lights, and we'd load up a 2.5 ton truck of the troops, and we'd go out and replace the guys manning the bunkers. That we knew something was going on, but we would go out and replace the guys in the bunkers who were doing guard duty. They would come out, and the new people would come in. But that was my job to sort of coordinate that, right? And so it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and I can remember that I left with the guys that were going to be the replacements, and it was. I can remember that we had to hike a little bit of a distance to this big truck park, big huge Klieg lights. And as we were walking through this truck park, I don't know whether there were any tanks there, but there were armored vehicles and so forth, 2.5 trucks, the Jeeps, whatever, And probably about maybe 3/8 of a mile away, I could see these spookies dropping flares. I could see these gunships called Puff the Magatrak, and what it was is the NVA and Viet Cong were out there in spider holes, and they were getting prepared to launch the Tet Offensive. It was coordinated all over South Vietnam, but it was scheduled for 3 o'clock in the morning. But what I was going to say was, so we're walking across this parking lot, glaring lights and so forth, and I'm sure these guys were out there in the spider holes, and they were probably looking down their sights at us, and they could have probably mowed us down like chaffs of wheat, but they were looking at their watch, and it wasn't time to start things, and so we loaded up our 2.5 ton trucks and went about our business of replacing the guards, and that's how. So now I'm back in the tackle operations bunker, and it's I'm wide awake, and so I'm basically arranged with one of my old girlfriends from my days at the University of Michigan, and all of a sudden, boom, boom, and all right, the Tet Offensive has started, and in come the rockets, and in come the mortar rounds, and oh my God, we're under attack. My second thought was, why the hell did I extend? So anyway, we're under attack, and I'm also hearing machine gun fire, and it's sort of coming in our direction. What happened was there was a group of officers who had their quarters nearby, and they all came rushing into the tackle operations bunker, and it got very crowded in there. And so they ordered me and the guard troops to go outside the bunker and form a perimeter. So and which we did. And when we got out there, we realized we were the mortar rocket attack lasted for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But we were taking a lot of machine gun fire that was coming right at our bunker. And what had happened was the NVA or VCOM, they had tunneled under Route 316, and they'd gotten into this sort of scrub area, large scrub area, and they'd set up a machine gun nest, and they were firing in our direction. Now, I don't know if they were necessarily firing at our bunker, but that's where the bullets were starting to end up. But between them and us was the 199th helipad. And we had 4 helicopters sitting there, and I think they were trying to destroy those. But those bullets were going right through there and right down. So anyway, I realized these machine gun fire was going right over. I was down on the ground, but the machine gun fire were going right over our heads, right? And I could sense that was the drag. I couldn't see them because they were obscured, maybe 300 yards off, and so they were a little bit obscured by it. But anyway, the bottom line. So I'm laying down. I could hear this machine gun fire, hitting the sandbags in the bunker and so forth. Some maybe even hitting. I don't know. But anyway, and I said I'm going to stay as low to the ground as I can. I can't get any lower. And I remember that I dug a ditch that came out of the mess hall, right? And it was about maybe 15 feet from me. And I remember I sort of shimmied over there on my belly and got down in the ditch. So I'm now even lower. So I was about to stand up and wave to them and so forth. And the thing was, I'm laying in the ditch. It was a drainage ditch, and a rat ran across my body. And Mike Cashman did not twitch 1 second. I didn't give a damn about that darn rat. So it was like all of a sudden over the hill comes the cavalry. And what had happened was that the word got down to, the whole countryside was under attack, but the word got down to Tanzania that we were under a lot of attack up at the northern perimeter 2nd Field Forces. So they sent up a couple Huey Cobras, and the Huey Cobras were these very sleek helicopters with these pods of rockets, okay? And they arrived. They have, great machine gun cannon fire too. So they arrived, and they saw that there were Viet Cong, embedded in this, scruffy kind of area. And I actually had my camera. Whatever reason I had my camera. I have pictures of this. But anyway, these Huey Cobras, that they backed off. And they sort of, took a look at what was going on, and all of a sudden, boom, boom, and so forth. And about 5 minutes later, there was no more machine gun fire from that group and so forth. So anyway, that was a good thing. But we were aware there was still a lot of heavy fighting going on to the north of us. Okay, because we could see it, we could hear it. I couldn't quite see it where it was, but the NVA Viet Cong also really aggressively attacked Benoit Air Force Base. And they blew what was there. There were a lot of big, huge aircraft fuel tanks. These, the things you see at the United Refining. So they blew up on one of those things. Boy, that explosion just, blew, and the billowing smoke. So we knew the whole countryside was having some issues and so forth. So anyway, it's now. And some of the guys who had advanced infantry training, who were clerks though, we're now being told, okay, guys, you need to get ready to go because we're going to send you out to, help support the brunts out there in the countryside. So some of those guys suited up and they left. I wasn't one of them. Thank you. So anyway, so it's about going on 8 o'clock in the morning, and we had a 7-mile ammo dump that bordered the let's say it's the east end of the 2nd Field Forces, and it ran for about 5 or 6 miles. And we're talking about bunkers are probably about 3 times the size of this room with all kinds of ordnance and so forth. The Viet Cong NVA staffers had gotten into the ammo dump, and they put timers on, delayed timers on within the bunkers, okay? And the troops were aware that these were going on. They sent people in who were, what do they call those people who, they addressed the issue of the fuse about to go, the timer and so forth. They didn't get to all of it, and closely around 8 o'clock, one of the ammo bunkers blew, and it sent a ball of flame into the air probably 1,000 feet. And the concussion, I was in the bunker actually, and the concussion was so great that I was sitting there, and we had these 8x4 supports, and the concussion blew me across the bunker, and even I got a big, huge gash in my head, so forth. I always thought I should have gone to a medic because I probably would have gotten a Purple Heart, but I wasn't. No, hell, I'm not worried about that. But I went out, and that was quite a scene, Quite a number of people were killed because they were out there addressing the timers on those things. And I think, a lot of people were injured, but can you imagine all that ordnance exploding too? Oh my God. That happened. And for the next couple days, I would say for the next day and a half, there was certainly a lot going on. But the biggest thing that was going on is we controlled the air. And so we had these Cobras, but we also had all these Air Force fighter planes, well, the F-104s, but anyway, and they were out there. They always go out in pairs, and they were out there for the next day or so, and they were dropping napalm on the suspected folks. And there were also, they also had the cannons, and so I would say by the early January or February 2nd, the battle of Long Binh was over, and so forth. And the sad thing was that some of us actually were called upon to go out at the end with gas masks, and we had bulldozers and we had backhoes, and we went out in the area, about half a mile off and so forth, picked up a lot of the decomposing bodies, and some were blown apart. You couldn't recognize them barely, or the limbs and so forth. And they bulldozed a big mass grave, and they, brought the bodies, and they just bulldozed the bodies unceremoniously into the mass grave and buried it up. But it was sad to see because, some of these kids were just young kids, and they didn't have anything. I remember, they were poorly clad, and I remember they seemed, I have sandals on now, but they were wearing sandals, and they were made from the treads of automobile tires, but I thought, they came all the way down the Ho Chi Minh Trail to do us in, but sad moment, so. I came home in April of '68, and I was happy to be home, happy to be alive.